Welcome everybody, this is SharePoint Patterns and Practices Webcast, and this time we're going to talk about GDPR Activity Hub. It might be that the GDPR doesn't actually mean that much for you, but it is a European European Union's, let's say, guidance around collecting certain information. I will walk through those scenarios within the webcast as well. This GDPR Activity Hub is built using the latest technologies in a SharePoint Online, which is available for you using SharePoint Framework and modern sites and Power BIs and all of that. And it's a great reference solution, a starter kit for you to have a look on how to build these kind of solutions in SharePoint Online as well. And that's really the key purpose of this GDPR Activity Hub initiative, or why we did build this to be available for you. So you can actually have a look on A, how to build a similar solution, or B, what if you're building not a GDPR related solution, but something else on the SharePoint Online, how to automate your deployments, how to set your, implement your web parts and all of that stuff, so it will be fulfilling or complete solution. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a Senior Program Manager from SharePoint Engineering, and with me today as the main presenter and the creator of the GDPR Activity Hub is Paolo Pialorsi. Whee! So Paolo, will you do the quick intros?
Yes, thank you, Vesa. I'm Paolo from psys.com. I'm a consultant mainly focused on SharePoint Online or on-premises and Office 365. And I live in Europe, so that's why I'm so focused on the GDPR, even if it will involve any company all over the world, because the GDPR regulation is for everybody, wherever in the world is managing personal data of European citizens. So yes, that's why it really matters for everybody. Yeah. And
this is just to slightly clarify the GDPR. It is an European Commission or EU regulation related on any company within the world handling European Union people's data, right? So there's some level of a regulation which is coming which has to be followed pretty soon. And this Activity Hub is for collecting that information or getting the information in a centralized location. So it is kind of this is not around, let's say, addressing the GDPR. This is a reference solution which could be used as the solution to get those cases in.
Yeah, or at least as a starter kit solution. In fact, if we move to the next slide, I think we can start introducing the hub, and we can explain what it is and how you can leverage it. So,
absolutely.
The GDPR Activity Hub is a reference solutions targeting partners and customers. It's a kind of a ready-to-go portal, but most likely you will like to build something on top of it, and that's why it is an open source project related to the SharePoint PnP project more in general. Here on this slide you can see the URL on GitHub, where you can find the full source code of the solution, as well as the documentation and all the tooling around this solution. The killer point and killer feature of this Activity Hub is that it is based on the latest technologies, and it is based on Office 365 and SharePoint Online, and it uses all of the patterns that we promote as PnP. So whether you need to adhere to the GDPR regulation requirements, or you simply want to see how to implement a modern solution using the SharePoint Framework, SharePoint Online, and Office 365 more in general, this is the point to go. This is the solution to have a look to. The main goal of the Activity Hub is to give to customers and partners a way to manage the basic tasks and phases of managing data of European citizens. But it is not a tool that by itself will let you be fully compliant with the GDPR rules. It's just a tool to help you adhere to the regulation. As I said, it's based on Office 365 and SharePoint Online, and from our perspective, it's a kind of showcase of the latest Microsoft technologies and their capabilities. So we said that we have a bunch of technologies involved, and in fact, the GDPR Activity Hub is mainly based on SharePoint Online and SharePoint Online modern sites. It uses the SharePoint framework, and in fact, it has a bunch of client-side web parts, as well as client-side development model in it, which makes it really modern and useful to learn how to create SharePoint framework solutions. Because we use modern site, we can also use Office 365 groups and Microsoft Teams, which are included in every modern site. We leverage the remote provisioning capability of PnP to do automated setup and provisioning of the solution. And last but not least, we also decided to use Power BI for providing insights and information about how your company, how your business or your customer's business is running and performing against the GDPR requirements and rules. So it's really a good showcase of modern technologies from Microsoft in a unique solution that you can simply install and use, or you can download, customize, and use as well.
Yeah.
From a functionalities perspective, there is a dashboard, which is the entry point of the solution. The dashboard is based on Power BI, and it's the point where you can see how you are performing from a GDPR perspective. There is a data repository, which is right now SharePoint Online, but from an architectural perspective, we decided to have a decoupling between the client-side web part, between the implementation of the GDPR Activity Hub and the backend persistent storage. So in case you want to use something else, not SharePoint Online, but let's say SQL database on Azure or whatever else, because you will have a huge amount of data that you want to store and you don't want to use SharePoint lists for storing such data, you will simply need to write a different persistence layer. You will switch the persistence layer in the solution, and you will be ready to go and to use a different repository instead of SharePoint Online. Why am I saying that? Because you know, SharePoint is a great repository for data and for documents especially, but I want to stress this information. SharePoint is not a DBMS replacement. So if you need to store a huge amount of data, you shouldn't use SharePoint as a DBMS replacement, but you should use a DBMS and create an enterprise solution that will use a DBMS in the backend and SharePoint as the front end. And that's why we have this kind of decoupling in the architecture of the solution. Even if right now, what you will find in the solution is just a SharePoint Online connector. So the only way to store data in this solution will be to use SharePoint Online, at least out of the box. We have a bunch of custom pages through which we provide the client-side web part UI to manage all the events and all of the information that you want to store and persist in your repository, as well as few basic workflows right now based on the Workflow Manager engine of SharePoint, still not on Microsoft Flow, but in the near future we do plan to replace them with Microsoft Flow. And those flows will allow you to manage the main tasks related to the events happening in your company and that deserve to be managed from a GDPR perspective. You also have a task management UI, which will allow you to figure out what are the tasks that are pending for you or for your colleagues, as well as a hierarchy GDPR client-side web part, which allows you to see what is the hierarchy of people in your company involved in managing GDPR data and some other general capabilities. What are those general capabilities? For example, we do have an automated setup and provisioning of the solution. So you can set up the entire solution in your own tenant or in your customer's tenant simply by using a PowerShell setup script and a bunch of remote provisioning stuff. But you can also use this automated setup as a kind of inspiration for creating your own automated setup solutions. We do provide general documentation as MD documents in GitHub, as well as I said, a customizable model so that you can build your own customized solution on top of it. And last but not least, it is an open source project, open for community contribution. So feel free to contribute back, feel free to let us know your feedback, and let us have your solutions, your customized solutions built on top of the GDPR Activity Hub, because the overall goal is to build a better solution altogether with a community perspective, with a shared community approach. As we do in PnP more in general, right, Vesa?
Absolutely.
So let's move to the demo. We will have a quick lap around the GDPR Activity Hub to show you how it works, how it is, and a little bit of how it works internally without digging into many details, at least not right now. So let me move to my browser and let me introduce you to the GDPR Activity Hub UI. This is the home page of a modern site which has been used to host the Activity Hub. As you can see, the home page has been customized so that we have a Power BI dashboard here, which will give us the main and most important insights about the numbers related to the GDPR in our company. So, for example, we can see how many requests to access, to export, to correct, or even objections to access data of European citizens have been handled in our company in a time frame. In fact, you can set a time frame which will be the reference time frame for this dashboard. You can see how many data events happened in that time frame, like, for example, how many data consent we collected in the last few days, how many of those data consent include sensitive data, if any, or if we had any consent withdrawal from customers of people that decided to withdraw their consent with our company, and so on and so forth. Moreover, from a data security perspective, on the right side of the dashboard, we have a kind of graphic that allows us to see how many data breaches we had in the time frame, how many of them are still open, how many of them are already solved, and how many identity risks we had in the time frame slot that we select here in the upper left area of the dashboard. So it is really useful, really informative from a manager perspective in order to see what is happening, how we are performing from a GDPR viewpoint. Of course, in order to have this dashboard filled with real data, we need to have some UI elements to provide data to the system. And that's why we have a bunch or a couple of pages to collect data requests and data events. So, for example, whenever we have a customer or a data subject, which can be a customer or a supplier or whoever else that we handle data for, we can get a request from that personal data subject to access or to correct or to export their data. So, for example, if you want to collect a request to access data of someone else, of a data subject, you can simply select that you want to store a new request to access data. You can provide the title of the request, which could be request to access Vesa's data. Okay. Data subject could be Vesa Juvonen.
Access denied.
Access denied. Withdrawal. Okay. The email, dear Vesa at Microsoft.com. Just kidding, this is not the real email address of Vesa. This is a verified data subject. The request has been assigned to someone else. As you can see here, we have a nice people picker built using Office UI Fabric, as well as the entire UI of this client-side web part was built using Office UI Fabric. We can have an insertion date to keep track of when the request has been filed in our system, and the due date for this request, which could be be next week on Wednesday. We can have additional notes or not. We can have a request to deliver this information by email, and we can save the data access request in our system, which now has been inserted. I can insert a new one, I can go back to home or whatever else. So this was a client-side web part built using all of the stuff that we have in SharePoint Framework right now out of the box. Moreover, I can also store information about events or incidents that could happen from a GDPR perspective. So let's say that I want to store the information about a new data consent that I want to collect still from Vesa, for example. So let's say Vesa is not yet in my system, but I want to store a new data consent from him. So data consent from Vesa, notified by someone else, which could be Vesa himself or someone else. Vesa, you are my target today, Vesa. Yeah, I will assign I will assign this data consent because it will be managed. It will have to be managed by someone else, to still Brian, for example, and the event has a start and end date if you need to keep track of all of the detailed information of the event, because, for example, if it is a data breach or an identity risk, you have to keep track of the very first time in which it happened and when it will ended. Then you have to keep track of the report about what happened, and you need to include information if there are any sensitive data included in the event that you are keeping track of.
And quickly on that one, Paul, just to say, you said that you'll have to, and the have to comes through the EU legislation. So that is by law, and that you have to do certain things, which is the reason why it's have to. So
yeah. And whenever you will fill any of these forms, and as you can see, if you select to collect a data consent event or a data breach event, the UI will slightly change accordingly to what you are filing in the system. In the backend, there will be some workflow items that will be created so that you will be helped by the GDPR Activity Hub in order to properly keep track of these events or requests that you have to handle. And that's why I need to assign those events or requests to someone in my company, because there will be a workflow and there will be a task assignee for any of the tasks involved in the solution. And of course, I don't want to file a bunch of real events in the system, so this was just for the sake of making an example. And I think it's enough so far, but just to show you a little bit more of the capabilities of this solution, you have the tasks page through which you can see what are the tasks assigned to the people in your company. You can see by default your own tasks, but you can also see all of the tasks assigned to all of the people in your company. And by using this UI, you can simply complete a task if you like. So again, using the SharePoint framework and the REST APIs of SharePoint in the backend, we will manage the completion of a task in a task list related to a workflow, but using this supposed to be nice UI based on Office UI Fabric. And last but not least, we have a hierarchy, which is the hierarchy of your company from a GDPR perspective. So you can see who is the data protection officer, who is the GDPR controller in your company, and who are any of the GDPR data processor that you have in your company. You can build these hierarchies simply filling a list of people in a custom list in this SharePoint modern site. So this is the UI, this is the lap around all of the capabilities of the solution.
And like Paolo mentioned on the slides, so this is a great, even though you wouldn't be super interested on GDPR as a functionality, this is a great reference solution for the web parts as well. So having a look on how these web parts have been built, how they actually work and all of that. And the second dimension is no doubt, how do I set it up in a matter of minutes, which is kind of cool because you do not need to manually set all of these things and lists and all of that stuff to the SharePoint site in SharePoint Online. Should we have a look on first on that one and then come back on the web part?
Absolutely, yes. And if you want to go to have a look to the GDPR Activity Hub, first of all, you can go to the GitHub site, so github.com. SharePoint, and spdev GDPR Activity Hub is the URL, as we said before, for the GDPR Activity Hub. Here you will find a welcome README file, as well as in the documentation page folder, you will find the setup guide through which you can set up your environment. And the setup guide will allow you to leverage a PowerShell script, mainly a PowerShell script and few manual steps that we will try to automate as much as we can in the near future. And using the PowerShell script, you can simply connect using your own credentials to the target tenant and use this PowerShell script, which will do the provisioning of almost all of the stuff you need except the Power BI part of the story. And you will target your group site, you will provide your credentials, you will be able to configure a CDN if you like, so that the setup process will do all the magic to create the CDN and to publish the files on a CDN for you, the SharePoint Framework JavaScript files, and so on and so forth. So simply by using this script, you will do almost of the setup steps. And of course, if you want to use this approach in your own solutions, it's an open source project. You can simply go to the source code of this PowerShell file, and you can see that internally we use PnP. We use Connect PnP Online and all the PnP CMDlets that we provide, again, as open source on GitHub for the entire community. So you can use this script as an inspiration for your own automated setup projects, if you like.
Absolutely. And quickly on that one, so this is super, super powerful, even though not a main topic of today's webcast, but this is so powerful because you can actually go build a simplistic solution, a reference solution, let's say for, demo on pre-sales purposes. You go to the customer tenant, say, hey, okay, can you sign in? And I'll just press the button, poof, and your stuff is deployed. That's super powerful. So you can actually automate that and reduce the time of adoption of SharePoint Online.
Yeah. And from a development perspective, what we have in the GDPR Activity Hub is a SharePoint Framework project, which I'm now showing you through Visual Studio Code. And in this project, we have the 4 client-side web parts that we saw in SharePoint Online. So the dashboard with the tasks, the hierarchy web part, and the insert event or insert request web part, as well as a bunch of components that we use in the backend of those web parts to manage the connection with the backend repository system. So for example, here we have the data manager class, which is the one that can abstract the access to SharePoint Online or to whatever else repository system that you want to have, and so on and so forth. It's quite an articulated solution, quite an interesting solution from a SharePoint Framework perspective, because it does have multiple web parts, it does have support for multiple languages, resources, and stuff like that. So again, and one more time, the overall goal of the GDPR Activity Hub is both to give you a starter kit to play with and to create your own solution, but also to take inspiration from and to play around it, just to create your own SharePoint Framework-based solutions, just using this one as an inspiration.
Absolutely, and a great solution and nice UIs using Office UI Fabric. It is using React, which is the React components, and Office UI Fabric React components as well, which is what we used internally in SharePoint Engineering as well, because, well, we just needed to select that framework, and React was the most suitable one for us. But great solution from that perspective.
And I think from a demo perspective, that's enough for today. Maybe in the future we will dig much more in details, but I think right now the goal was to share with you, with the entire community, that there is a new guy in the set of offering from PnP. Give it a chance, give it an eye, and let us know what you think. So, Vesa, I would like to come back to the slide deck.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
Yeah, and just to remind to the audience, to the community, that there are a few useful short links to GDPR. The first one is to the area for partners, and the second one is the short URL for the Activity Hub by itself, which will bring you to the GitHub repository. And keep in mind that GDPR, from a more general perspective, and not only from a technical perspective, it will become reality next year. So time is running fast. So if you want to be compliant, it is now time to start being on track and compliant with the requirements. And this Activity Hub want to be a helper solution for you to be easily brought to the compliancy with this GDPR Activity Hub, even if, let me repeat it, it's not a tool that will let you be completely compliant by itself. It's just a tool to support you, but you will have to do a lot of stuff on your side as well. And it's not a product that you can simply install and use just to fix, just to solve the GDPR requirements in one shot, okay?
Yes. That's a good clarification so that nobody thinks that, hey, I just download this one and voila, I'm all done with this requirement. So that's not really true. So
I think that's all. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Visa?
No, all good with this one. So thank you, Paolo, for this great introduction on the GDPR Hub, and I hope this will be beneficial. If you have been following up on the PnP journey in the past, you probably are aware of our PnP Partner Pack, which is our, I wouldn't say legacy, but older version of, let's say, a starter kit. And the PnP Partner Pack currently does not support modern sites, or there's some other things. It is the idea of that one was also to have a reference solution with a business case and show you how to make things happen. Exactly the same case in here, and also to tackle or give you some insights on how to build a solution to address some of the requirements from GDPR. But I think that's it. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you for the great solution. Please, community and people who are watching this, give us feedback, give us input, go to the issue list in that repo. If you have questions, if you want to contribute back, that's fine. If you just want to download the solution and have a look on it, or build your own solutions based on this existing thing, absolutely fine as well. It's open source. You can reuse that any way you want. But I think that's it. Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you.
And we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Bye-bye.